Hello, welcome to Cardboard History. I'm David. Today I'm doing another episode in my Ken Burns collection, and this is my second time recording this video. I was trying out some new things. My wife is teaching a new class, and so we're trying some new software, and I didn't realize that the audio cut out halfway through. So this is my second time recording this video. Hopefully everything goes a little bit more smoothly. This video is part of my Ken Burns collection, and if you haven't seen any of the other videos, the goal of this project for me has been to collect kind of a wide breadth of players throughout baseball history, players that had a significant impact. And then as I collect the cards, I want to learn more about the players and share some of their stories. And so that's what I'm doing in this series. And today I have a card from a member of the Chicago Black Sox team that allegedly intentionally threw the 1919 World Series. I'm pretty sure it's widely accepted that there was some portion of that series that was not on the level, and certainly the first two games seem to have quite a bit of evidence pointing towards the fact that there were several players involved in throwing the World Series, and 8 players eventually received a lifetime ban from baseball because of their involvement in that plot. So the player that I want to discuss today, whose card I recently picked up, is Chick Gandil. And Chick was sort of the ringleader of the Black Sox. He was widely known as the player who had contact with the gamblers who had set the whole thing up and got 7 additional players involved in the scheme. Now Gandil, his story and his background definitely has some things that would point towards his character of doing whatever it takes to make a little bit of money and being willing to do things even a little underhanded. He was born in 1888 in St. Paul, Minnesota, and his family moved a lot when he was a kid. They moved to San Francisco, then up to Seattle, and eventually back down to Southern California. And it was in Southern California that he started playing some amateur ball, eventually moving up to semi-pro leagues. He played a little bit for a team in Amarillo, Texas before they folded, then went back to California, played for a couple Pacific Coast League teams, went to Arizona for a season, then down to Mexico. While he was in Mexico, he really, I think, had to broaden his income, and so he did other things like working as a boilermaker in a copper mine. He also did some professional boxing on the side, making about $150 per bout. So all of these things together, as he was developing his skills and coming up through the kind of amateur, semi-pro, minor league systems, he eventually made it to Shreveport, where he played for a Texas State League team. And that was where he settled in at first base and began to draw attention of some major league scouts. He was drafted by the St. Louis Browns, but he failed to make the team. And the Browns wanted to send him back to Shreveport to continue to develop, but he refused to go back. And instead of going back, he went out to Fresno to play for an outlaw California League team. And this was at the time where Major League was really trying to consolidate their monopoly on baseball. And there were several leagues who were willing to take players who had been blacklisted or kicked out of baseball and to allow them to play in their leagues, and would even seek to try to lure high caliber players with large salaries. This is, things like the Players League, the Federal League, all were kind of set up as competitors, and that is what Chick Gandil went to out in Fresno. He signed onto the Fresno team, got a salary, but then when Major League Baseball threatened to blacklist him from organized baseball, he left the team and went to go play for the recognized Pacific Coast League team in Sacramento. Now, when he left, he had already accepted his salary from Fresno, and he refused to pay it back and left without paying it back, and was eventually arrested on charges of theft because he took his salary without actually playing out his contract. So right there, I think that little incident is maybe some foreshadowing of what Gandil was willing to do to make some extra money. In Sacramento, he played well enough that he drew again the eyes of some scouts and ended up being signed to the Chicago White Sox and Charles Comiskey. So this was his first rookie year because he never played for the St. Louis Browns. And during his rookie year, he really did not do well. And before the end of the season, he was traded away to a Montreal minor league team. I want to show a couple cards as well of Chick Gandil through his different playing years and teams. So this is his T206 card playing for the Chicago White Sox. And then when he was traded to Montreal, this is the Imperial Tobacco card of him on the Montreal team. And he was traded at the end of the season, and it was kind of in that in-between space where the minor league season had ended, but major league hadn't. And he felt like he was due his full compensation for the full major league season, but Comiskey disagreed. And when Gandil and one other player that were traded appealed, they lost. And so Gandil actually missed out on getting paid for the full season because Comiskey traded him away just before the end of the season in September. So already Gandil doesn't have great feelings towards Comiskey because of the way that he cheated him out of his salary there, and Comiskey was definitely a penny pincher as an owner and did whatever he could to save money and to keep more of the earnings in his own pocket. In Montreal, Gandil continued to get better. He batted over 300 and was under contract to be traded to the Cubs, but two National League teams blocked that trade. So he ended up going back for a second season with Montreal and eventually was traded from Montreal after a dozen games or so that season to go play for the Washington Senators under manager Clark Griffith. And Clark Griffith really found in Gandil a player that filled a need on his team. He is quoted as saying that once Gandil joined the team, they won 17 games in a row, and he definitely helped that team improve, but it was not without his issues there. He was a stalwart at first base, led the league in fielding several years, led his team in RBIs, but his constant chain smoking drove the manager mad. So this next picture here is his Cracker Jack, 1914-1915 with the Washington Senators. And while he was a fantastic fielder and batsman for the Senators, he was eventually traded away because he consistently would chain smoke. He would smoke in between innings, and Clark Griffith just had no grace towards that habit. And so he sent him away to Cleveland, where he played a year for the Cleveland Indians. And they're his M101-4 card with the Indians. And he played okay for the Indians. They won 20 more games after he joined the team than they had the previous year, but that was only enough to bump them from 7th to 6th place in the American League. And he was eventually traded back to the Chicago White Sox before the 1917 season. So in the 1917 season, the White Sox made it to the World Series, much on the back of Gandil's play, as well as several other star players. And in the World Series, he led his team with 5 RBIs. They won the World Series, and he got his ring or pocket watch or whatever it was that they gave away back then. Or knowing Comiskey, it might not have been anything at all. So following the 1917 season, 1918, the season was shortened by the war. The Sox fell back to 6th place in the standings. But the following year, the war had ended. At the beginning of the 1919 season, the owners came together and realized they needed to cut costs. They were really concerned about attendance dwindling in wake of the war. And so as Comiskey figured out how he was going to cut costs, one way he did that was by taking this shortened season, which was shortened from 154 games back to 140 games, and he deducted the players' salaries by 12.5%. So for Gandil, that means that his salary for the year dropped from $4,000 down to $3,500. So even heading into the season, the players had a little bit of a sour taste in their mouth with Comiskey and the way that he was paying them. A few other examples that have surfaced as examples of Comiskey's penny pinching ways. The team was allegedly called the Black Sox not because of the cheating, but because their jerseys, their uniforms would get so dirty because they wouldn't be laundered. Comiskey refused to pay for the laundering service and forced the players to pay for it, so the jerseys just never got laundered. and they accumulated dirt, and the White Sox became the Black Sox because of their dirty uniforms. There's also a story from the star pitcher in 1919, Eddie Sykot, who was allegedly due to receive a bonus of $10,000 if he hit 30 wins. And as he got towards the end of the season, he hit 29. And then in the final game of the 1919 season, he was on the mound, led his team to a 1-0 lead at the end of the second inning when manager Kid Gleason pulled him from the game. So heading into the third inning, he had the lead, was pitching well, and Gleason pulls him from the game, and that prevented him from getting his potentially 30th win, which then meant that he did not get his $10,000 bonus. So there was however much Comiskey played in preventing that 30th win was another way that he was really trying to save money at the player's expense. So that was how the season ended. And then heading into the World Series, Gandil and many other players were discontent with Comiskey's payment and realizing that they had an opportunity here to make some money. And so Gandil got in contact with several gamblers. There were two different groups that were he was working through. One included Joseph Sullivan. The other was former Major League player Bill Burns, Abe Attell, and working together with notorious gambler Arnold Rothstein. These men all together conspired to throw the World Series. The White Sox were the heavy favorites, and by throwing the World Series, the gamblers could make a significant return on their money, and the players themselves were due to receive about $10,000 each. However, most of that money never made its way to the players, except for to Gandil. The series went 5-3 in favor of the Reds, and there were definitely evidences of plays which should have been made, which had been made all season, which seemed to indicate that players were intentionally making errors or pitchers were intentionally throwing pitches that were easily hittable for the Reds. And that year, by the way, the 5-3 series win, it was a best of 9 series, so that's why it ended up that way. And the White Sox, having lost the series, rumors began to swirl about who all was involved. And Gandil's name was certainly at the top of the list. Following that season, Gandil went to Comiskey and demanded a $10,000 salary for the following season. Comiskey balked at this, and Gandil, who was out in California for the offseason, decided never to return and officially retired from organized baseball, or at least from Major League Baseball. He continued to play in some outlaw leagues and things of that nature. The following season, 1920, rumors swirled all season long, and eventually, following the season, there was a trial. The players were acquitted, but the new commissioner of baseball, Judge Landis, banned 8 players, including Gandil, pitcher Eddie Sykot, Joe Jackson, Shoeless Joe, Buck Weaver, who claimed to have nothing to do with it. He knew about the plot to throw the World Series, but refused to participate in it. But he was banned from baseball because he knew about it and didn't say anything. So 8 total players were banned. And let me show the card now that I picked up for Chick Gandil. And this is from the W514 series. This set, W514 strip cards from 1919, 1921 era. This is the set to collect if you're looking to collect Black Sox players. It has 7 of the 8 players that participated and were kicked out of baseball. The only player not featured in this set from the 8 men that were kicked out of the league is Fred McMullen. And Fred McMullen was a rookie, had just come up, and he doesn't have any cards of him with the Sox. His only card is a Z-Nut minor league card. So these are strip cards, meaning they were hand cut. So most of these are going to get an authentic grade. You can tell this one was cut off at the bottom a little bit. It did receive a 1. It's in pretty great condition with the picture being shown well. It's a blank back. But these cards, you can find them in all sorts of conditions. They can be cut right up on this border, so you don't have any of the white on the outside. But overall, I thought this was a great example of Chick Gandil. So there's Gandil with his W514 card. I'll leave that down there. So, following the season, these 8 players kicked out of baseball. Gandil allegedly walked away with about $35,000 of the earnings. No other player received more than $10,000. And as the go-between, it would appear as if he was supposed to distribute money to the other players and never did, and kept most of it for himself. Now, he played a few more years, played in the Copper League, which is a league that ran in Texas, Arizona, and Mexico in that area, and several other players, including Buck Weaver, joined him in the Copper League so they could continue playing baseball after they were kicked out of the major leagues. But after he retired from baseball and moved to Berkeley, California, where he worked as a plumber and eventually retired, he did interviews even in his old age and continued to deny any wrongdoing. He did admit in 1954 that at one point there was a fix, but when rumors began to swirl, the players abandoned the plot altogether. And so he admitted at one point they had thought about doing it, but was not willing to admit that they actually threw any of the games. So that's his story. He died in 1970 at the age of 82 in relative obscurity, and it wasn't until people began to look more into the history of the White Sox that his story kind of began to develop. And that's Chick Gandil. Definitely one of the villains of baseball in the 20th century. And who knows, without his involvement, if there would have been a thrown 1919 World Series, if somebody else would have stepped up, or if the Gamblers would have gotten to someone else on the team. But he certainly played a role in putting a black eye on baseball, one that would scar the game really until Babe Ruth came on and renewed the hope of America in baseball. So that's the story of Chick Gandil. Thank you all for watching. We're glad to be able to tell this story a second time since I had some issues with recording the first time. So if you've watched it before, hopefully the audio on this one holds together and we can fill in some more of the story that you weren't able to hear last time. Thank you all for watching Cardboard History.